I actually started writing prose first. As a kid, I wrote prose, and then later, when I first went to college, I was writing prose, and through my until about my mid-20s, and then I remember I was taking a class in Cambridge, and a writing class, and it was a fiction writing class, and the professor the first day said, I want you to know there's no rules to this. You can write whatever you want to. Anything goes. And then so the next week, I brought in my piece, and he said, well, last week I said there were no rules. There is actually one rule, and I had broken the rule. I had because I wrote something that was sort of very Borges, Calvino-ish, separating the being very self-consciously writing something. And and then I just continued to fail through the whole class. I just kept doing the wrong thing through the whole class, and I just sort of realized after that class, I realized that it seemed like for me, for what I was doing, poetry could do more what I was doing. It was doing what I was interested in. It could move a lot quicker. It could, it didn't have the same time constraints. It seemed it wasn't so tied to description and to narrative. Although I still like to have a strong narrative through my work. So then I just sort of, I had been reading more and more poetry up until then too, and then I just sort of really that class so it was a writing class that drove me to poetry. Yeah. And then then I started written poetry, and I'm still a poet. I'm still primarily a poet, and I've written this book, this memoir now, and but in some ways. I feel like I'm just getting away with something. So it feels to me like there's a lot of poetry in the book. Who's the writer? The man with the Chinese hat. What's her name? She's this great poet basically, but she writes what she calls novels, and she'll start out the first couple of pages. Carol Mazo, and the first couple of pages will look like prose, and then she'll just totally fall. It'll just become poetry. But she managed to sell them as fiction, so she sells a lot more books. So I really admired that she was able to do that, to call herself a fiction writer, yet basically be writing poetry, experimental poetry too. So with this book, there's a lot of narrative tissue in it, in the memoir, that holds it together. But basically, I wrote it almost through the same process as I write poems, in these very sort of discrete units, and then had to sort of build a structure out of it. So.